So this morning, the growing pains. We're in a kind of an upheaval in our country, in our world. We've got pandemics and we've got all kinds of weather conditions. We have had challenges. How many of you after the end of 2020 said, oh, thank God it's going to be 2021? And now we're wishing for 2022. So how, as spiritual beings, do we handle this kind of change and this kind of challenge? One of the things that people don't want to do is let go of control. We like to be in control. We were taught to be in control. We reach a place in our spiritual journey where we have to let go of control and realize that we really don't control a lot of things. And I think 2020 and 2021 have shown us that we don't control everything around us. What we have control over is ourselves. This is where we have control. So how do we handle that control? The problem with it is that as human beings, in our humanness, in our ego, we need to be in control. We don't want to let go of control. And that is a difficult practice for all of us. When I am not in control of something, I feel very vulnerable. Especially if it's something I'm used to being in control of. But that's my humanness, that's my ego, that's the part of me that doesn't trust that there is a higher power at work in the world, in my life. I don't know if any of you did EST a few years ago, many years back, you did EST, and in EST they said that when you finally come to the realization that you're out of control and you don't control anything, that's when you are in control. So there's a riddle for you to take home for the rest of the movie. But I'm bringing this up, and I was called inspirationally to talk about this week because our suicide rate is higher than it's been. Our incarcerations, our domestic violence is higher than it's been. We have had no control, very little control, over what was going on around us. We've had weather issues, fires, tornadoes, floods, freezes. You know, right here in Rockport, we've been hit 4 times in the last year with things that we really didn't have any control over, other than how we took care of ourselves. And for a lot of people, what I learned as a counselor is that when people really do feel out of control, those are the folks that decide to take their own life. They have such despair that they can't control anything. And yet, there are things we can't control. What we can control is how we deal with it. The fires, the global warming. You know, what I understand about global warming is it happens about every 68,000 years anyway. Geologists can look on the rocks when they're reading the rocks and see that about every 68,000 years we have a global warming. Problem with us in this day and age is we've exacerbated it with our with the way we use our gasoline and some other things that we need to be adjusting to. And And we don't want to do that. We don't want to give up. We like the familiar, don't we? We like to have it like it's always been. We have, I don't know if any of you are dealing with this, but we're dealing with this in the church right now. I can't control that we can't go on and finish the building because we have materials that are on back order for months, and we just have to wait. And we waited so long for it in the first place. So we all are experiencing the things that are going on in the world around us that we can't control, and a lot of people are having a very difficult time with it. I'm getting more calls for counseling. I'm getting more reports on people who are having mental issues, and it's being that I can't control what's going on in my life. So that's really what we're gonna talk about this morning, and see how we might deal with the things that we are facing right now. This is a new time. It's not familiar to us. Old habits that we had no longer serve us. And when you can't control, what is the opposite of control? It's surrender. That's not how many of you cringed when I said surrender? That's not something we like to do. So, but the opposite of control is to surrender to what is. How do you do that? It's not about not doing anything. It's just about not fighting what is. It's about what is mine to do in a situation like we're in right now. There are some things we can do. I can surrender my control, but then how do I deal with what's going on inside of me when I do? To surrender to something or some issue requires trust. You don't want to surrender to somebody you can't trust, right? So we have to have trust in order to be able to feel like we can surrender to something. And in this instance, all of you are in this room because you're on a spiritual path. You're on a spiritual journey. You are here because you want to grow spiritually. Your soul brought you here, more than your personality brought you here. And so there's a higher mission that you have to come here each Sunday. You are both human and you're divine. You are human and you're spirit. And so when the human of us can't deal with what's going on in our human world, if we want to keep our sanity and if we want to grow spiritually, we have to surrender. We have to trust that there is a higher power. I don't think anyone in this room could do a very good job of explaining and defining what a higher power is. I certainly cannot, but I know it exists, and I know it's in all of us. We all have a higher power. We all have a spirit and a soul. We're all always being guided. Your spirit is always guiding you. Your spirit, your soul, your higher power, intuition never leaves you. You leave it. You kind of blank out and don't listen. But it never leaves us. It's always a part of us. And so we have to find a way in these places where we're just I mean, I can't tell you how many people I've talked to in the last 2 weeks who are in despair about what is going on. They don't want to wear a mask again. They don't want to be shut down again. They don't want to close their business again. None of us wants that. Barbara and I lamented this week that we had to put the social distancing ribbons back up again. We didn't want that. And yet, right now, that appears to be the wisest thing we can do. So we have to trust in what our higher power is always guiding us to do. How do we trust what we call God or what we call higher power? How do you do that? Well, one of the ways we can do that is to count our blessings. Think about how blessed we are in this world. Some of us don't stop to think about it nearly often enough, but we are blessed in so many ways, and we've been blessed in so many ways. And when we pay attention to that, when we have an awareness of that, then we realize that we do live in a friendly universe. We do have a loving God, whatever you want to call it, higher power, creator, whatever resonates with you. It does exist. Now, we don't see that, but we see the results of that. We see the results of that higher power at work in the world in all ways, at all times. So we have to give up the idea that we, human ego, has to fix everything. We don't have to fix everything. We have an inner guidance. We have an inner voice. We have that higher power that is here all the time, helping us move through the tough times. We just have to be in awareness of it and in what I would call partnership with it. And you've heard me say this Sunday after Sunday after Sunday. Our spiritual self, we all have that spiritual self, is much stronger, greater strength than our human ego is. And so what we have to do, we have to let go of that thinking that we have to control everything and allow that higher spirit to guide us. It's what we call an inside job. You have to go within. Meditation is a great way to do it. We're going to have some singing bowls here today at the end of the service, and just remind you there's a 4 o'clock singing bowls meditation. But going within and being in touch with that inner part of us in the silence is ours to do. It's part of our work to do. One of the things that most of you know about that can bring you back to your center and remind you that you aren't in control is a serenity prayer. You all know the serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. It's a great way to kind of get your center back, to remind yourself. So that's just a couple of how-tos. There's some more how-tos. People ask me, when people get into this kind of despair and they come to me for guidance, I have about 3 things that I make sure that I guide them to do. And one of them is every day, write a gratitude journal. Find something in your life every day to be grateful for. We have so many things in this country to be grateful for. And we take so many of those things for granted. We have a whole percentage of our population right now griping and complaining about absolutely everything. And when I hear that complaint, I invite them to go to a third world country. Or not even a third world country. Go to England or Ireland. They don't have any heat. I was in Ireland when it was 28 degrees. I was in England a different year when it was 28 degrees. Nobody has any heat. The businesses don't have heat. They heat their homes with coal. Have you ever got how close you have to get to a fireplace of coal to even feel any warmth? 95% of the rest of the world has no hot and cold running water in their houses. We have so many things to be grateful for, and yet we've become a country of constant complaining. And, you know, I think part of that psychologically is this experiment of freedom, of having freedom through our Constitution, has been, what, 10 generations, 9 generations, 8 generations? People are taking what we have for granted. You can't worship where you want to worship in the rest of the world. So much of the rest of the world tells you who and where you can go and what you can do and what you can't. You're not free to cross a border. You're not free to worship in any church you choose or choose any religion that you want. We take so much for granted. So one of the things that I always have people do to get back to center, to get grounded again, is to have them do a gratitude journal every day. And I don't mean to take a lot of time. Write down 5 things every day that you are grateful for. And I'll tell you, after I traveled around the world for a while, I still give thanks every single morning of my life to hot water in the shower. Because I went places where I didn't even have hot water in the shower, and it was a lot colder than we have it here. So there's always something to be grateful for, always something that you can be grateful for. And it puts us back in our center when we can just sit down, get yourself a little notebook, write on it that it's your gratitude journal, and write your gratitude every day. Just 5 things. And you know what? If you can't think of 5 things every day, put the same 5 things down every day until you can begin to get into the habit of looking for the things that we do have and that we have and can be grateful for. I spent a lot of time doing hospital, going for a week with doctors to do surgery in third world countries. You would thank God for the hospitals that we have here. Even the ones that aren't so good are a whole lot better than the ones that I experienced. In Guatemala, in the heat of summer, there was no air conditioning in the surgical ward. There were 20 people recovering in a surgical ward, and they had one of those big stand-up fans, one of them, for 20 people. There were windows, but they weren't allowed to open the windows because they didn't want the bugs and the lizards sleeping. We have no idea how good we have it. So gratitude journal and find those things that you can be thankful for. And, you know, our government is in upheaval right now. It's not perfect. We're not perfect people. The people who wrote the Constitution weren't perfect people. There's always room for improvement. But that's ours to do collectively. It's not ours to grouse about because somebody else isn't doing it right. We are a part of this wonderful free country that we live in. And every one of us has the responsibility to be able to have a say in how this country is run. And to admit, none of us are perfect. We're all still trying to get it right. And the other thing is that what we take for granted, which is several hundred years of democracy, we can't take that for granted. Democracy is not a given. It's a gift. And we have to keep being a part of having that be how our country runs. So we've got the gratitude journal going. We've got the meditation going within. The next thing that I tell people to do when they get into that depth of despair and when they feel out of control and don't know what to do, I have them volunteer. When you volunteer doing something for somebody else or some institution, you get outside yourself. And it works every time. So we want a gratitude journal. We want to be a volunteer somewhere. It broadens our awareness of others, of all of the things that we have that sometimes we take for granted. You can go to, you know, what do you love to do? You know, I came from a really big church in Houston, and we had 500 volunteers in that church, 500 volunteers. But when they offered to volunteer, the first thing we asked them is, what do you love to do? I can't tell you. We've got all kinds of opportunities. What would you like to do? And then they tell me what they would love, and we would make sure they did it. So when you're deciding to volunteer, be sure that you kind of know, what would I love? Do I love animals? Would I like to volunteer at the animal shelter? Would I like to volunteer at hospice? Would I like to volunteer in a nursing home or a church? We could use a few volunteers around here. We're always open for that. But find something that's a cause greater than yourself. Something greater than yourself. And just do it once a week, an hour a week. It's amazing how it will shift your perspective. And then the last thing that I teach people to do is free association writing. How many of you know what free association writing is? It's when you sit down with a yellow pad and you write 3 pages on that yellow pad as fast as you can write. It's not a journal. Nobody's going to read it. You don't worry about whether the grammar's correct or the spelling's correct. It's not for that. It's to sit down and take everything that's swirling around up here in your head and putting it down on paper. And amazing things will happen in your life. It's a form of meditation, actually. And for people who say, I can't meditate because my mind won't shut down, it's the perfect way to meditate. So free association writing is a powerful way to just, we're talking about bringing ourselves back to the center of who we truly are and not allowing our human egos to drive our bus, because that's what happens. We're comfortable with our humanness, but there's more to us. and the strength and the power that's in us is the Spirit of us. And so what we want to do, especially in times like this, where people are in such despair, is to reconnect with that which we call God or Spirit or higher power. Each one of you probably has a name you would choose. I like to call it my higher power because I have no idea what it is. But I know it exists. And I know what it's done in my life, and I see what it's done in other people's lives. You're on a spiritual path. You're here this morning, sitting in a seat in this room, because you're on a spiritual path. Because I know you all have a whole bunch of things you'd probably rather be doing, but here you are. And so, my guidance is to say to you, don't forget the power of your higher power. And when it feels like you're in despair or you're out of control, give into that place within you where your truest power is. And I want to say one last thing about that. When we get on this spiritual path, we can't get off. We can get off for a little while, but you get back on. You can try to ignore it, but you get back on. Once you get on this spiritual path, and it's important that you realize that once you're on this spiritual path, you've got some work to do. And it's messy work. We have to deal with what is in us that was there, which called us up to be on a spiritual path. We all have it. We all have stuff that we had before we got on the spiritual path. And being on this spiritual path calls us up to deal with that. And those of you who have been there, Stephen, you could probably attest to this. We want to be on the spiritual path, but we don't want to do the messy work. We don't want to do the things that's gut-wrenching and makes us cry and makes us want, we don't want to deal with that. And so we don't. But you can't heal what you can't feel. You can't heal what you can't feel. We have to go inside and feel the pain that brought us to this place and deal with it. The 23rd Psalm says, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. The key word there is through. We've got to get through it to the other side. We can't avoid it. We can't walk around it. One of my professors at school was Robert Brummett. He was my counseling professor for about, 8 or 10 years, because he was that all the way through all of my studies. And he calls it the spiritual bypass. That we can't take the spiritual bypass. We have to walk through it. We have to deal with the pain. And know for sure that we do get to the other side. We do get to the other side, but we can't circumvent it or not deal with it. So, you have to be willing to feel your feelings. You have to be willing to be on that path for your spiritual growth. You have to let go of that grip of control. And you have to know that it's okay to cry, it's okay to grieve, it's okay to feel those feelings that you have been avoiding all these years. There's a story, it's a Zen story in the Zen tradition, And the story goes like this. The master's child died, and he was weeping profusely. His disciples approached him and said, "Master, do you not teach that all is impermanent and that death is just an illusion?" The master nodded yes. And then his disciples said, "Well, then why are you crying?" And the master replied, "I am crying because I am sad." He was in touch with how he really felt. And it doesn't matter that he was teaching people that life is impermanent. He still was sad at the loss of his own child. We have to stay in touch with those things that are within us that are maybe pushed aside and never healed, or we've tried it and walked away from it because it was too painful. We have to go through that valley of the shadow of death and get to the other side. And the freedom on the other side is amazing. So there's a saying that says, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until we face it. So we have to see what it is that's up for healing in us, and not avoid it, and not avoid the pain that comes with it. And you will be amazed what happens on the other side. I noticed this in Houston a lot. You know, I was doing this in Houston for 22 years, and what I noticed is, because I was also head of the counseling department, when people would come to me for counseling, and they would be in this place of being in pain, and we would talk about it, and I would say, "Well, I haven't seen you at church in a while." "Yeah, I didn't want to go to church. I've been feeling too bad. This was too bad, and I just didn't want to go to church." And I said, "Well, that's the very time you need to come to church, when you're in pain." That's an avoidance thing, and we humans do it, but it just prolongs the pain. So I'd invite you, as so many people are now, if in fact you're one of the folks now that are feeling the pain and the heaviness of what's going on in our country, what's going on with the virus, feeling like we got to the other side and now we're feeling like we're just starting over. This is a lot of what people are feeling so heavy about right now. And if that's true for you, remember, it's okay. How you feel is okay. But you're going through the valley of the shadow of death. You're not pitching a tent and staying there. That's when we get in trouble. That's when we get stuck in that place and we don't move on. So if right now you have issues, or you're heavy, or you're feeling like, a lot of us lost loved ones last year, and we couldn't even go to the memorial service. And I used to think that funerals were awful, and why did people do it? And then I realized it gives people a chance to grieve and cry and get in touch with their feelings. And many of us didn't have that opportunity during 2020 and part of 2021. So just be aware of what's going on with you, and allow yourself to be vulnerable, and allow yourself to know that, yeah, I can feel pain, and I have some ways to move through it. So remember your journal, remember your gratitude journal, your pre-association writing, volunteering, finding ways to move through whatever is sitting there and not feeling very good to you. So, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until we face it.